beautiful ship, the Constellation. Our warship, built in the late 1700s by Americans, helped to win the War of 1812 as we fought against the British. Lots of history here. You know, I'm involved in this history. I'm proud to say that my lineage goes back 400 years to the founding of this great nation. Back in the 1600s, a movement started to take place in Europe called the Reformation. And some of the people in that movement decided they're going to go and see if they can colonize and escape from this corruption in this new land called America. And a few years later, a number of Christians, Bible-believing Christians, decided they're going to go and give it another try. It's a crazy story, but long story short, after a few attempts that failed, they bought this ship called the Mayflower. Small, half the size of the Constellation. Can you imagine that? Just something like 25 feet wide, two-masted. They carried about 140, 150 people on that Mayflower voyage. They were called the Pilgrims, the Puritans. They took off from England in the year 1620. It was in August. Winter was coming. And those people crossed the Atlantic. It took them 2 months on that small little ship, half the size as this. Half of them died the first winter. Those that survived were the founders of this great nation. And I'm proud and happy to say that I come from a direct lineage of the few who survived, namely John Alden and Priscilla Mullins. And from that lineage is myself and my family and my ancestors for the last 400 years. Lots of history, especially in Virginia. Right now we're in Baltimore, Maryland. Beautiful, beautiful city. And tomorrow we'll be at the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And we'll go to see a few monuments and memorials. And I'll let you know some really interesting tidbits. Be proud to be an American. Another tidbit that you should be aware of. This great city was designed by a Frenchman that George Washington hired. His name was Charles Pierre L'Enfant. I may not be pronouncing it properly, but I'm standing at the foot of the nation's capital. You see behind me the George Washington Monument, and further you see the Lincoln Memorial. To the right is the White House. To the left is the Jefferson Memorial, all in perfect alignment to show the sign of a cross, with the George Washington Monument at the center of that cross. So don't tell me this nation was not founded upon the Christian principles of the Bible. Hi, Kawika here again. I stand on the steps of the nation's capital, the most magnificent building ever built in the history of mankind. And in my hands, I hold a copy of the Constitution of the United States of America. My grandfather, Dale S. Crowley, was a radio evangelist for over 60 years in this city. He was heard throughout the East Coast. My father, Dale P. Crowley, was raised just a few blocks behind this building. So the roots of our family go back hundreds of years since the founding of our great nation. And now I stand on the steps of the Capitol with this incredible document, the greatest document ever written in the history of mankind. Such an incredibly beautiful building. Here's a couple of tidbits. Back in 1790, George Washington, our founding president, decided that our new nation's capital is going to be in this area. In the year 1800, the entire federal government moved from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. as construction was beginning. Tidbit: how many people do you think were in the federal government in that year when they moved from Philadelphia to here? 126. Today, over 2 million people. Talk about big, fat-ass government it has become. Now listen, we got politicians here making buku bucks, hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. My salary, $174,000 as a congressperson, that is a bunch of bullcrap. I know people who need it much more than me. So my promise to you, as it was in the last election, half of my ridiculous salary of $174,000, I'm going to dedicate and give to the Wounded Warriors Project. You got my word. They need it more than me. As I said, Washington chose this area many, many years ago. But do you know what this area was at the time when Washington chose this piece of property between Maryland and Virginia? It was a complete stinking swamp. It was a swamp. We're going to go through a lot of the beautiful places here, but you won't believe that this entire basin was a stinking swamp. Unbelievable, huh? And you know what? It probably still, not probably, it's still, in many respects, a stinking swamp. With politicians, crooked politicians, greed, corruption running rampant. I'm not saying everybody's that way, but let me tell you something. The guys in those offices right there, they're taking a few kickbacks, if I may say. And it ain't right. What we need in Washington is not experience. Experience is the very thing that brought us here to this disgusting situation of $17 trillion in debt. Our founding fathers would roll over in their graves. What we need now in Washington is not experience. What we need now in Washington is common sense.
America, America, make God thy gold refined, till all success be nobleness, and ever again divine. And you know, when I was in school, we used to sing something like this. Listen here. Oh, beautiful, far spacious skies, far amber waves of grain, far purple mountain majesties.
The Arlington National Cemetery. Got tears in my eyes just standing here. One of the most sacred, hollow places in our nation. I remember as a kid walking through here once. I must have spent 2 hours just meandering through all of the walkways. It was just, it grabs your heart. If you've never been here, you must come. By the way, they have at least 25 to 30 funerals every day here at the Arlington National Cemetery, where over 200,000 people are buried. Let us never forget the sacrifices of our military. We are here as America because of these people and the lives they've given. Never, ever forget.
When I was in school, we used to sing something like this. Listen here. Oh, beautiful, far spacious skies, far amber waves of grain, far purple mountains.
The Iwo Jima Memorial. What a battle that was. 6,000 Marines lost their lives in that invasion of the island of Iwo Jima. And as a group of Marines headed up toward the top of Mount Suribachi, there happened to be a photographer who was following them. And that gentleman passed away recently. But that image that he got in that photograph of those Marines putting up the American flag in victory will live in memory for generations and decades to come.
Remembering the genius of Thomas Jefferson.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That line was from one of the most incredibly well-crafted pieces of work ever written in the history of mankind. The Declaration of Independence. And that man is responsible for it. Do you know how old he was? We had this picture in our minds from drawings of the founding fathers getting together in various rooms. And they all look like old farts, bald heads, white hair. You know something? They were all young. Do you know how old this man was when he wrote the Declaration of Independence that John Adams asked him to write? He was 32 years old. It's young to have that kind of talent and awareness. Those guys, our founding fathers, were geniuses. Geniuses. We can never, ever forget that. And by the way, on the back of that statue, you can see carved the two crops that were the biggest money makers for the colonies back in the early days, 1600 and 1700s. You know what they were? Corn and tobacco. Yes, it was tobacco that helped fund the Revolutionary War and helped to gain our independence from Britain. So you anti-tobacco whack jobs, stick this up your nose and smoke it.
I'm talking about America, sweet America. You know, God
Stands the heart of our great nation. Yes, it's the center of the vertical of the cross. Remember I was telling you about that. The George Washington Monument. I've been up there twice. It's just phenomenal. A couple of tidbits about that. It's 550 feet high. But the first cornerstone was laid in 1848. They had to stop construction at the beginning of the Civil War for like 3 or 4 or 5 years. Then they began it again using the marble from the same quarry. But the quarry level had dropped during that time. Thus, you see, if you look at the Washington Monument, right above the scaffolding, you'll see a slight change of hue, the color of the marble. Isn't that fascinating? Here's another tidbit. concerning the Washington Monument. Not one metal rebar is inside that. That's amazing that that structure can stand so tall and strong over all of these years. It's not built like all of these buildings. No rebar. The White House. I call it the outhouse. Sorry. It stinks with corruption for decades and decades. John Adams, our second president, inscribed on the mantle in the White House these words, and I'll read it. I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house and all that shall hereafter inhabit it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof. Well, he'd roll over in his grave, that's for sure. Yeah, the White House is called the White House. Why? Because in the War of 1812, when British invaded America again, and pretty much we escaped annihilation by the skin of our teeth. It was an incredible war. They burned down much of Washington, including the White House at the time. Same ground, same place. But they burned it so badly that they had to repaint it like 15 to 20 times to get rid of the stain of the fire and the smoke. And that's where they came up with the term, the White House. Interesting. Hi, Kawika here. As we kind of wind down this little small tour of Washington, D.C. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for joining me. We're at the Lincoln Memorial. 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. That is part of the Gettysburg Address that I learned when I was 10 years old. My father said, "You want to make some money?" And I said, "I always do, Daddy." So he said, "Learn and memorize the entire Gettysburg Address. I'll give you $5. Back then, my friends, $5 was like $5,000. And in a week's time, I learned it. And I'm glad I did. You know, he was called the Emancipator. In an 1854 speech in regards to slavery, he said, quote unquote, "I hate it." Look at that beautiful National Mall. Can you imagine? In 1963, a gentleman by the name of Martin Luther King stood on these steps and gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. That must have been what we call in Hawaii chicken skin. I wish I was there. Over 200,000 people were present. And that changed the course, in many respects, of our nation. That's right here on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial.
I have a dream. America. I love you, America. You see,